Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Rowley. I'm with the NOAA Central Library, and we are happy to be hosting today's talk on the what and why of plain language. This is being brought to you by Miriam Vincent, who is the staff attorney at Legal Affairs and Policy Division at the Office of the Federal Register for NARA, and Katherine Spivey, the senior communications specialist at the Office of Strategic Communication in the General Services Administration. And with that, I'm going to let them take it away.
Great. Hi, this is Katherine Spivey. I should also say that we are coming to you pretty much live from the Plain Language Action and Information Network, and we'll be talking a lot more about plain, as we call it. But yeah, this is the briefing. I am happy to send my slides, if I haven't done that already, to Katie so she can send them onto the attendees. We're going to take questions via chat, and I guess we'll just get started. This is us. We had a quick discussion earlier about what happens if people have questions that they don't think of, during today's session. You can email me. That's fine. Just please say, I heard your NOAA talk, just so that I have some frame of reference of how we met. I would appreciate that, but I'm happy to get questions afterward, because that's how I do my questions. It's not until I hit leave the meeting that I think of all the questions I want to know. So I am co-chair of Plain, and Miriam is our legal advisor and web guru and, person who comes up with a lot of the historical knowledge of the organization. So that's pretty helpful. What are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about plain writing, plain language, the law, how you can benefit, how some of it is very similar to what you've probably seen already if you've ever taken a writing class. We'll talk a little bit about the Plain Writing Act of 2010, which is coming up on its 10th anniversary. So exciting. International Plain Language Day is October 13th, in case you want to put it on your calendar. We'll talk about how to get more training and how to discover the federal plain language community. So that's sort of what's coming up. The first question, and Miriam is going to chime in whenever she feels appropriate, but what is plain language? This comes up a lot. Just what are we talking about when we say plain writing, plain language, plain English? And there's two caveats I always add around here. Number one, plain language is an international effort. There are several countries doing, very extensive, very well thought out plain language programs. And, we'll be talking about that, but I can only talk about plain English. There's plain Spanish, there's plain French, there's plain Scandinavian, there's a lot of different ones, but I can only talk about English. And also, we use plain language and plain writing pretty much interchangeably, but the industry standard is looking to be moving toward clear communication. So it, works with information design and content design, as well as words and pictures and graphics. So just, trying to get that out of the way for what it is. But what is plain language? How do we judge whether something is plain or clear? And it's a style of writing that allows readers or listeners, however your audience is consuming what you've created, to quickly find what they need, understand the content the first time they read or hear it, and use the content to fulfill their needs. Now, this is all three. All three things have to be in play. Not one of them is better than the other. For example, when you have quickly find what they need, that does not mean a footnote on page 72 of a 168-page document. That's not, you can't find that quickly. If you have to read it 7 times to figure out what's going on, that's not plain. You have to be able to get it the first time. and you have to be able to use it. Now, this is where I say, if this were an in-person, I would say, how many of you get content from your agency that you don't know why you got it? And then people would raise their hands. And I'm going to just pretend that I asked that, and everybody raised their hands. And we were like, yeah, we get content all the time. Now, I just had a job change in GSA, so I kind of understand while I'm still getting things, but I've never figured it out before. Why am I still getting some information about this program, this website, this whatever it is that I don't even remember using ever? So, what you have to have is quickly find, be able to understand it the first time, and to be able to use it. Because I don't know about you, because this is where I usually say, how many of you could get maybe 20 more emails or 10 more phone calls? And nobody ever says yes. Nobody. We're busy people. We've got a lot to focus on, and we prefer to only get information we have to read. None of this optional nonsense. So what you have to do to make it plain is help your audience find the information. That's what's called, using design features or content design. That's a bit of a new discipline coming up, information design, and help your audience understand it. How do you arrange it? How you phrase it? So, if your content doesn't do both, it's not plain language. So if there are any, particular slides you want to print out and put on your cubicles or your fridge or whatever, the definition is really helpful and what you have to do. So this is also a list of the techniques. Now, if you have taken ever any writing class, business writing, journalism, staff writing, anything like that, you will have faced these techniques. They may not have been called plain language, but all of these techniques work together to form, plain content. For example, it's called audience-centered organization, or writing for your reader, or reader-centered organization. It's using design features such as headers or tables or bullets, bulleted lists or anything like that. It's using short sentences and paragraphs. I was editing something this morning that had an 8-line sentence. It's much too easy to get lost in that. It's using pronouns. Who does what? Who has to do what? That's really helpful to, because we are, as a government, we have a sort of built-in, oh, they're only going to write, badly. They're only going to be, hard to understand. It's going to be bureaucratic. And so if we can work our way around that, we get our audience on our side rather than opposed to us. It's using active voice, and I promise this is not going to be a huge grammar fest. There's going to be a few grammatical elements. We focus on verbs, not nouns. A lot of my job of doing plain language editing is putting nouns back into verbs, straightening out the sentence. Using consistent terms. Not using jargon, reducing the number of acronyms we use, and explaining them, not assuming our audience understands exactly what it is 100% that we do, and focusing on common everyday words so that people focus on what we need them to do or what they have to do, and not figuring that out. That's 2 separate steps. I mean, you have to figure out the instructions before you can follow them. And you don't want people putting all of their energy into, oh, I figured out what I have to do. I have to do this, 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 and that. You want them to go precisely to this, this, and that and do it, rather than spend all of their time for the task figuring out what to do. So these are the techniques, and you have probably, as I said, heard them perhaps called different things before, but this is plain language. And here are some of the benefits. And this is an important thing to remember. that we're not just asking you to adopt plain language for, the fact of the federal government having a beautiful style, or, being able to not be embarrassed by content, or, it's just something we dreamed up that we thought it would be fun for everyone to do. I mean, who has time for that? We are looking for business benefits and transparency and open government. So what we're looking for is the actual benefits of having people understand things the first time. If you write something plainly, then your audience will do what you've asked them to do. You will not get phone calls, you will not get email, you will not get questions, you will not have to send a whole ton of follow-up emails so you get material done. I had this experience a couple years ago when we were dealing with the transit subsidy. There was some change, and the benefits people, benefits HR, whoever they are, sent out emails every day for a week saying, your transit subsidy has changed. This is what you have to do. And then the next day it would be, in response to our previous day's emails, this is what you have to do. And then on Wednesday, they corrected Tuesday's email. And I gave up because, I have a very limited exposure to, the Metro subsidy. That's all I do. I go in, I put it, I get it every month. That's the end of story. I don't want to have to understand it. I just want the money. So I went to the person who knew things in my division and I said, Gloria, do I have to do this? And she looked at it and said, not unless you live in Maryland. And I thought, well, I do not live in Maryland, so I could stop having to listen or read these increasingly frustrating emails. But that's what people want. Do I have to do this? Do I not have to do this? That's all. People often don't actually care. They just want to know what they have to do. They don't want the reasoning behind it. Just what do I have to do? Stop explaining things to me. Just tell me what I have to do. So writing plainly and in the first place means you get fewer questions and you have more time for other stuff. And I don't know about you, but I'm assuming that your job is like mine, and there is always something to fill that space. Always. You will have to spend less resources, whether that is time, money, energy, staff time, whatever, on enforcement, and you will get fewer errors. We're thinking about forms specifically here, but if you make something clear and people understand exactly how it needs to be put in, like, oh, do we use hyphens with these numbers or not, then they will do what needs to be done. So this is efficiency, not a desire for, beautiful style. For example, here's, just an example of how revising something into plain language reduced the amount of time staff was dealing with a particular issue. This was a veterans benefits form letter. The old letter was doing 9.4 calls per month per counselor, and it turned, the revision meant that they got 1.6 calls per month per counselor. And the lesson from this is not only will plain language bring about business and efficiency benefits, but also it's a reminder to look at what is causing the biggest problems. Now, I come from a web content background, and so whenever people come and say, oh, we'd like you to look at our web content, I always say, what's a year's worth of analytics? What's a year's worth of analytics on these pages? How many page views? Because if you get me a page that got 114,000 page views over the last year, then yeah, I'll look at that. If it got 6, I'm just going to ask you why you have that page at all. So you have to look at what is causing a problem. Where do you want to invest your time? Where will you get the biggest benefit to your material? And you have to do that because honestly, we could spend our days, I mean, I spend a lot of my time revising stuff, and sometimes you have to ask, is this worth the revising? What's going to be the impact? You know, do all the really big stuff first in the sense of important or goes out to a lot of people, gets a lot of page views, but, you know, maybe old content, maybe not. You know, maybe not until you've reached the point where there's nothing left to do. So, Plain Writing Act of 2010, as I said, 10th year anniversary coming up. That's what governs plain language, that and the final guidance from on that. All new documents that meet this criteria must be written in plain language. This applies, just so you know, paper, electronic, text messages, anything, any material that goes out to the public. Now, before everyone gets excited, I always feel like I'm the disappointing person where I say it does not apply to internal email, which is a huge bummer because there's so many of them that need to be. And it doesn't apply to Congress. It just applies to federal executive branch agencies. So that's like us. You know. So it's documents that are necessary to get government benefits or services or for filing taxes. That's the major group of what needs to be in plain language because it hits the American public, you know, citizens, non-citizens. Documents that provide information about federal benefits or services, or documents that explain to the public how to comply with a federal requirement. So anything that's going out to the public needs to be in plain language. And, you know, that's even beyond the, you know, business justification for plain language. It's, you know, not only is it the law, it's a best practice so that you're not wasting your audience's time, because with social media, with websites, with email messaging, there's a lot of distraction and you want your message to be quickly understood. So
and I'm going to jump in here just and make
please.
one extra point that yes, the Plain Writing Act does specifically exempt regulations, but it does not exempt the preamble of regulations. So preambles are still required under the Act. They're considered covered documents, and the regulations themselves are required to be written in plain language under a series of executive orders going back to Clinton, 12688, and then the Obama Executive Order 13563. Both require regulations themselves to be written in plain language. So even though they're not specifically covered or they are excluded from the statute, they're not excluded from the executive orders.
Which is excellent. That's why we always like to have Miriam on these sorts of presentations, because I don't think about regulations because I'm not in that, if I may use the word, wheelhouse, but she is, and she knows all about those. So thank you, Miriam, for clarifying that. So the Plain Writing Act of 2010, if you want to read the final guidance and the text of the law, you can go to plainlanguage.gov, which I'm going to be referencing a lot because it's where we put it's the, you know, federal government plain language resource repository, if I can use that. And we've got federal plain language guidelines, of which more later. They expand the discussion of the techniques. They give more examples, they give specific references, and you know, they've got some more before and after than we feel able to put in that particularly. So plainlanguage.gov is a federal site, and you can, you know, browse around it to your heart's content. I should also mention that the Plain Language Community of Practice is the sort of community and sometimes support group for people who have the job of doing plain language or trying to do that. And it's a good way to get questions answered, to get training, and, you know, to learn more about what's going on. We host our meetings every month. They're the second Wednesday generally, and we host them through Digital Gov. So if you want to join the community, I think last time I checked, we had about 1,100 members. It just plainlanguage.gov, and if you scroll down, it's right above the footer. You can just subscribe there. So Miriam mentioned executive orders. I find that in a lot of my work at GSA, because we are mission support, we do a lot of, as you know, building leases. We've got the Public Building Service, and we have the Federal Acquisition Service. So there's a lot of buying and selling and businessy kinds of things going on. And one of the things that resonates with GSA audiences is the Executive Order 13571, which is streamlining service delivery and improving customer service, which essentially says, hey, Cox Communications is doing a really good job with chat. Maybe y'all should do chat, you know, for your customer service. And it's what people are beginning to expect, what starts working in the public realm, and then people say, why can't I get, you know, chat messages from the government? You know, why can't they reset things? And so, you know, for a good 5-6 years, we've had a chat function in the information technology category division, which is the thing, you know, that's the body that buys and sells IT on behalf of the federal government. And if you know, have bought something from us and there's an issue, you have a question, you can email, you can chat, you can call. And chat is by far the most popular. So this, you know, I'm not entirely sure how you all interact with the customer, but your customers' expectations are rising all the time. And with that, you know, unhappy note, it's also doing things online is a lot cheaper. We had a conference, and, you know, Craig Newmark provided some good information about what does it cost. It's 10 years old, but it still shows, I think, the funnel that you can do a lot more cheaper online. So, you know, I don't know how much customer service you end up doing. So one of the things is you organize to serve the audience or the reader, not necessarily what you need to do. I feel like I've been doing a lot of documents lately, and what has happened is I find a couple of different things. Is people start with, well, particularly now, they're all starting in these uncertain times, and then it's like they've got some filler going on, and then the second or third, even the third paragraph, then they get to the point. And so a ton of my job is deleting that first, you know, paragraph. Like, yeah, all times are uncertain. You know, just get to what you're trying to say. But, you know, like the reader does not know how your office is organized, and your reader should not have to know that. You know, we call this in web content, what are your readers' top tasks? What are people trying to do? And, you know, you figure that out. You don't have, oh, we're going to list all of the, you know, we're not going to list the org chart. People on the outside don't care. You know, they just want to get whatever they're trying to do. So that's often the hardest thing to arrange within plain language. I mean, it's just really difficult to get people to focus on not what they want to tell them, but what they want to find out. And it's often interesting how there can be such a discrepancy.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
if you go back quickly back to the other slide, anticipate questions an informed reader is likely to ask. That's the questions that they're actually asking, not the questions that you think they should be asking.
Right.
If it's not that you have to spoon feed them what it is that you think is right, they're not going to pay any attention to that. You need to give them what it is that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And that is perhaps the hardest part about plain language, is managing the relationship with the people whose work you're editing. You know, where you can say, no, we need to do something different. You know, because they have it all set in their minds, like, that's not going to meet their needs. So one of the things, this is where we talk about content design, which is how do you arrange information? How do you emphasize the important information? Use headings or headers, you know, whatever phrase you use. Cluster the information under the header. You know, don't return to the topic 3 or 4 times. Just put it all in one. Help the reader navigate, because I don't know if you've seen it, and let me scribble down a note to maybe send one. There's a the F-shaped scan. People scan web pages, and I'm again thinking of that. And online behaviors are moving offline. So where people used to read paper more closely, now they're scanning there as well. And so you have to break up the information so it doesn't get lost. You know, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can use the headers, you can use bulleted lists, you can just, I think sometimes the biggest plain language key on the keyboard is, well, besides the delete key, is simply the enter for make this another paragraph. I mean, there are just some things you think, oh, why is this so just big wall of words, is how that often is. Sometimes you can do question headings, and I don't really want to get into frequently asked questions right now because people make up questions. Like, I have new content coming up, new content that no one has done anything on yet. It's not being offered, but they already have a section called frequently asked questions. And I had to say, wait a minute, you haven't even offered this. How do you know what their questions are? You know, and that goes back to the point that Miriam made, which is start with what the reader needs to know, but don't just throw the kitchen sink at them. That's a little tiresome. Lists, there's some, you know, good things to remember. Use numbers if it's steps in a process or a required order, but use bullets. There's a grammatical point, make items parallel. I think I might have something else later. And, you know, add some space around it. I talked about content design, and one of the things that I've found, you know, really helps is, and this is not on the slides, I don't think, but try to get rid of introductory phrases like, here are some important ideas to bear in mind. You know, anytime you're using it is important that, or here is, there is, here are, there are, you're shoving important information away from the most important placement in the sentence. You're wasting it. Beginnings are important, ends are important, the middle, dead zone. So, you know, try and keep your subjects and verbs out of that dead zone. You know, watch your prepositional phrases too.
Another thing,
go ahead.
we don't have a slide on this, but if you figure that people are only going to read 50% of the words that you have on the page, and of the words that you have on the page, 25 to 30% of those words are filler words, then you have just dramatically increased your chances that the only words people are going to look at and see are going to be there are, important, should,
yeah,
recommend. And they're not actually get the meat. They're not going to see the important words. They're going to skim, they're going to scan, they're going to catch the filler words. They're going to decide there's nothing on the page worth reading. And they're going to do it all in about 2.5 seconds. And then they're gone. So you want to get rid of as many filler words as you can, so that if you've only got the real meat words on the page, then even if they're only reading half of those, at least you're assured that the words they're reading are the really important ones, and those are the words that are gonna make them stay on the page and read the rest.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, if you get rid of the filler, then, you know, they're left with the meat of the important part, as it were. Talking about lists, don't make them too long. You know, I struggle with this because I think people read straight down. So, you know, I want people to be able to do that. But, you know, sometimes you just have to look at things and say, wait, this is way too long. You know, because sometimes it's just like, what are you trying to do with this? For example, this is where I say how easy this is to read. And generally when I'm, you know, in a in-person class, people groan or they make remarks or they, you know, raise their hand and say they've finished reading it. And this is just tiresome because a lot of the words are repeated. You know, there's supplement 1, there's supplement 2, and it's hard reading across. It's literally very hard to read across, particularly if you don't, unless you have a ruler where you can put it up to a straight edge. So one of the ways you can restructure these to be, you know, to use content design to make it more pleasant to read is you make it a list or you make it a table, you know, just in the sense of how can you not present this to your reader. Now, list will almost always be good. Tables are really best for if-then statements. For example, I used to have to pay estimated tax, and first they sent out paper brochures. This was a long time ago. They sent out brochures with 2-column pages. And so, you know, they would say like, if you live in Virginia, North Carolina, Ohio, blah, 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 send your payment to Pittsburgh. And I did have to sit down with it flat on a table and read it with a straight edge and then circle the city and the address. And then one year they said, oh, here's a table. You know, all you have to do, go down to Virginia and there's the address for Pittsburgh. And it just made it so much simpler. You know, so if you can put an if-then construction into a table, you know, you will be saving a lot of time and energy and using good design. Why use tables? They save words. They make it easy to find stuff. They highlight the if then, and it's a really big help. So one of the things I've started doing is being a lot more table conscious. You know, can you put something in a table and have it make more sense? For example, this, you know, I'm lost. I'd need a calendar. I'd need something. You know, I'd be sitting here, what's going on? What am I supposed to do? And then I would be, you know, as I do every time during tax season, complaining bitterly that it was hard, you know, all of that. But that you can do if then, if you submit, then we must receive it, and this clarifies a lot better. You may have the ability to use that. So we look also for, are you trying to oppress your audience with sentence and paragraph length? And, you know, that's one, you know, if you can limit it to one subject or step, smaller bites of information are easier to consume and you have a better idea. Now, I am never going to come to your agency and count the number of lines in your paragraphs, But if you are the kind of person who likes numbers, then 7 is generally a good number. But sometimes you have to step back and eyeball it and say, okay, do we have several killer paragraphs? Do we have 2 small paragraphs, then a really big paragraph, and then 2 smaller ones? Because that kind of unbalances the page. So don't get stuck in your paragraphs, try and make them easy to read. And similarly, use short sentences. Only treat one subject. You can use pronouns to refer to things and have a second sentence that continues the sense of the first. And if you like counting words, the last I checked, it was 20, but I think they've started recommending 15. Sometimes you can do that, sometimes not, but shorter sentences, really do keep your audience from going astray in your sentences and focusing on the wrong material, like Miriam mentioned, the filler words.
But you don't want to get so focused on short sentences that you revert all the way back to first grade.
Right.
You don't want see Dick, see Jane, see Spot run.
Yeah.
That's the whole structure of your paragraphs, the sentences within your paragraphs. You want to write as you speak. So you want to have some short sentences and you want to have some medium sentences, and every once in a while you can have a long sentence, but you want to flow. You don't want a lot of choppy.
Yeah. Although sometimes I have known several choppy sentences to turn into a bulleted list and work that way a lot better. So
I mean, that's one example of where you try and you do something and you realize that it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
Something else works much better.
Yeah.
Like text into a table,
Mm-hmm.
chop imperative sentences into a bulleted list. You realize that, oh, I really should be using a completely different technique.
Yeah.
And voila.
Mm-hmm. Or if you're listing a lot of dollar amounts or, numbers, maybe that needs to be a graph of some sort. Like, when I'm reporting on page views, I'm never going to run those into a sentence. I mean, it's just too distracting to go back and forth seeing where those are. That would be a list, or maybe it would just be a shared Google document, a Google spreadsheet, and they could look at it there. So one of the things about using pronouns is generally you're writing to people, and it makes it a lot easier to speak directly, and it sort of makes your writing immediately relevant, and it's a lot easier on your readers if you clarify who's supposed to be doing what we do, what you'll have to do, or before we can decide on your contract, we'll need to get this from you, boom, boom, boom. That really helps. People want to do it. They don't want to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it is that they're supposed to do. You've heard the phrase cognitive or mental load, and if plain language removes some of that, so you can move on to actually doing it. I don't know how much you've heard about active, not passive voice. People come from different backgrounds. Sometimes they know this, sometimes they not. But bureaucraties, or the language that bureaucrats use, is notorious for using passive voice because it avoids responsibility, or it doesn't name responsibility, or it de-emphasizes responsibility. For example, in mistakes were made, who made them? We don't know. It's grammatically correct. Passive voice is probably correct in about 5% of the cases. You know, it's very important to show who is doing what. I'm looking at some material right now that says the decision to reopen leased buildings, blah, 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 will be made by the FRC. And so the thing that I'm doing for that is making it active. The FRC will decide when to reopen or reoccupy a building. And that's just the detail, the passive voice detail puts information in a way that it can be easily missed. This is again back to what Miriam was saying about if you take out the filler. Generally, if you move passive to active, you lose all the helping verbs that passive voice requires, and you have a tighter construction, a more easily understood. Another thing, if you are having difficulties with passive voice, this is the surefire way of figuring it out, is can you add by zombies? So for example, if we say mistakes were made by zombies, then that's a passive voice, because the active voice version of that is zombies made mistakes. That's the active voice version. But mistakes were made by zombies. Okay, it still is zombies made the mistakes, but it's in passive voice, and you have to puzzle it out, you know, and I feel like I deal with the passive voice every single day, or, you know, the passive voice is dealt with by me every single day. And it's exhausting. It's not what I want to be using my brain for, to figure out who's doing what. I want that explicit. I do not want to have to, you know, figure it out. I'm figuring out other things. Avoid hidden verbs. You have probably seen versions like this. Instead of analyze, the ones on the right are the ones that you could use, but you've got present a report. You've got a verb there, just use it. Do an assessment, just use assess. I mean, some of this is word equations is how I kind of think of them. Also, that came to the conclusion that, how are we doing on time? Well, I'll tell that story later if I have any time. But, you know, this is the sort of thing that can really tighten and take out the filler words that, you know, you might have in, you know, in text. Don't sound so bureaucratic. Limit jargon and acronyms unless you know exactly that, you know, everyone you write is going to, that you're writing to is going to know about them. Obviously spell them out and take a look on how frequently they're used, because like people are not necessarily going to read sequentially. I was looking at a lot of PDF reports, and people said that their audiences reported back that what they were doing is just hitting Control F for the specific piece of information they wanted. They were not reading the intro, the overview, the thank yous, the list of words. You know, they weren't doing that at all. They were just trying to get exactly what they needed. And one of the things, this is from my previous job at GSA, is I was working with the telecom people. Those are huge projects. Those, you know, a lot of details. They were working on it. They brought something to me for dispatch handling systems, and they called it DHS. And I, you know, went back to them and I said, hey, guys, you know, I think the Department of Homeland Security has that one locked down. And they said, we've worked on this for 6 months and we never thought of that. People get into their own little worlds, or they think that everyone knows certain things. And, you know, part of the value that I bring as a plain language editor is the questions, which is, what is this? What is that? I don't know. And, you know, if they have to go look it up, then you failed as a writer if your audience has to look things up. I mean, as far as business writing goes, if you do it in the mystery novel you're writing and get it published, then that's fine. It's always fun to look up words. You can also use contractions as a way of doing that. That's perfectly grammatical and often more helpful than prepositional phrases. Okay, here are some more everyday words. Generally, instead of those on the left, go to the ones on the right. I will also add utilize. When I was teaching at Quantico, I had a student who explained, and you're missing the visual because, you know, he borrowed my pen. The Marine Corps captain borrowed my pen and said, so if I write with this, Miss Spivey, I'm using it because it's designed to be written with. And I said, with you so far. And he said, but if I poke your eye out with it, I'm utilizing it because it is not designed to poke people's eyes out with, although it's very, suitable for the purpose. So, think about the shades of meaning. Utilize is not the same as use. It's not just being fancy. It has a very specific meaning, which you generally are not using. Yeah. Okay, we have some action items for you as we come to the close. NOAA's Plain Writing Act page, so you can look that up. You have someone who can provide more training at NOAA, Karen Robin. Oh, I think I've accidentally included, sorry, I'm gonna do a correction on the fly because it drives me bonkers. So yeah, it's E, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, okay. So Karen Robin can help you with that. As I said, work on the key content, public facing, big impact. Take a look at the guidelines and you can join Plain. So a little bit more information. So I think that's all. So let's have some questions. I see there are some.
Great. Thank you so much, Katherine and Miriam. This was a wonderful presentation. We have a lot of kudos from everyone online saying that they love this. And
fantastic. Thumbs up at all of you.
Yes. We did have one question come in earlier. Using the I statement, is that using I instead of you and we, what's the deal with using I?
Think I'm blanking specifically on that. I think it's probably around here in the.
I don't know that we had a slide on there as opposed to, that would have been in the pronouns.
Yeah.
Usually I is going to be used if you're doing actual question and answer headings.
Right.
So, and frequently asked questions would fall into this category, but they're not the only kind of questions. But if you've got a question, you write it from the perspective of your reader. So you would use I in the question, I in the heading. What do I need to do something? When do I need to file the report?
Yeah.
When do I need to do X, Y, and Z? And then the answer, immediately following that question heading, you start answering the question. And you say, you need to file the form by next week, by the second day after you get whatever, by June 15th. And so I is only going to be in your question headings because you're never going to use it if you're talking on behalf of your agency.
Right.
You're not going to be using it in formal writing unless you end up being the decision maker and you are writing on behalf of yourself, or you're writing on behalf of the decision maker who's actually making that decision. So if you're writing a letter to somebody saying, I, as the director in my capacity, am making a decision and I have found this, that, and the other thing, you'll use I. Aside from that, you're never going to use I because the agency is either going to be the acronym or it's going to be we.
Okay, great. That helps a lot. Thank you. Our next question is, would you use contractions in a formal memo or avoid them because it's too informal?
No, absolutely use them. Don't use them all the time. I mean, again, moderation is the key to most things, including plain language. So you don't want to use a contraction everywhere a contraction is possible. But a contraction isn't necessarily informal, and it doesn't make formal writing informal. And there are times, especially when you're dealing with negatives, when it's safer to use a contraction than to not. There is and I don't have the example right in front of me, unfortunately, but a few years ago, maybe about 10 years ago now, the FAA decided to not do something. And I forget exactly what it was, but it was really big news that they did not do X. And the New York Times reported on it. Except in the headline, they did not use a contraction. And they dropped the word not. And so the headline reported that the FAA did do something, which made headlines for all of the wrong reasons, because it was big news that the FAA did not do it. There are all sorts of legal ramifications for if FAA had actually done it. This was the front page of the New York Times making the mistake, which then generated lots of additional newsprint and having to run a correction on the, I don't know if they made the home page, the front page of the Times or not. But in that case, if the headline writer had used the contraction, didn't, instead of did not, there would not have been an issue.
And another, oh, sorry, Miriam, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say that one of the things to consider is whether your content is going to be translated, because I don't deal with translations myself, but I was talking to the group of people who did the multilingual community of practice, and they said, I think it's something like no other country does contractions, no other language does contractions. So if it's being translated into, I think it was Spanish, French, Portuguese, don't use the contraction. Go ahead and do the full word, because what it's going to do is it just makes it a lot easier to translate, which I did not know. You know, I thought, that is really surprising.
Okay, we have a few more questions. First up, do you have any advice for those who can't seem to get out of that passive voice writing style? Is there a tip or a trick to help you get into the active voice?
Well, nobody drafts in plain language. I mean, we have several important things to tell you, even if I'm going to axe it. You know, I'm just trying to get material out so I can see sort of what I'm thinking and how that's working. But you have to go back and edit. And then you have to go back and, you know, make passive sentences active. And I've always found it handy if I'm, you know, stuck on something, is find a coworker and say, what's your take on this? And just watch watch how long it takes them to read something, you know, particularly in passive voice, and say, what slowed you down? You know, what was hard about this? And sometimes I'm just trying to figure out who's doing what, or I was not sure about this paragraph. You know, I mean, that's feedback. That's user feedback you can get.
I mean, yeah, the other thing you can do, and we don't necessarily recommend this for content, but you know, it's a tool, and if you're going to use it as a tool, that's actually what it was designed for. You can turn on the grammar check in Microsoft Word.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to do it because and find out what the end result is, or have it figure out what your grade level it is of the document. Those kinds of things are really not helpful. Microsoft Word is really good at finding passive voice. So if you turn on the grammar check and you go through, it will irritate you.
Yeah.
if you're doing it deliberately because you know it's going to irritate you, because it's going to find all of the things that you're not seeing, that's where its use is. And then, you know, you just, every time you draft something, you stop and you run the thing, and then you say, oh, look at all the times that I forgot. And you just sort of mentally slap yourself on the back of the head and go fix it. And it's habit, and eventually you will train yourself out of it. It may take years, but you've just got to practice and retrain, and you've got to retrain yourself. There's nothing.
Yeah, there's no real shortcut. I mean, it's one of those habits we've fallen into. I'm just going to pass on some knowledge I had from using that particular feature on some grad school papers. Don't do it if you're doing 17th century drama, because they used passive voice like you wouldn't believe. And you know, it's where I learned to be impatient with grammar checking tools, because as you said, Miriam, they catch everything. And you know, I was like, no, that's actually a quotation, it's right. Quotation, quotation. Yeah, like, oh, that's really frustrating.
Right. But you know, if you don't like that, then get a rubber band and stick it around your wrist, and then every time you catch yourself doing it, slap yourself with the rubber band, and maybe that will help. I mean, you know, it's just whatever mentally gets you to stop using it.
That's what works.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have the jack into the brain to rewire.
Yeah.
Yet.
Not yet. But
Not yet.
One thing you can do is just tell yourself that's got to be a necessary part of the editing process.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as I said, draft whatever you want, but you know, you got to clean it up. And particularly if you've been writing with people who use the passive voice a lot, it is easy to pick up bad habits.
Yes. It's much easier to pick them up than to get rid of them.
Oh yeah, like all habits. Are there any other questions, or?
We did have a bit of a observation that on the plainlanguage.gov website, there is a header that says, in light of OPM guidance and increasing concerns about COVID-19 coronavirus, we are suspending accepting training requests. And they're wondering, is that plain language?
I think in light of the COVID having to do a whole bunch of things in a hurry, yes. Now, it's also true that writing can almost always be improved. There are things that I've written that I go back and like, oh my heavens, I don't believe I forgot that, or whatever. But yeah, there's a ton of non-plain language pretty much everywhere.
And last question, because we're running out of time. Someone said, we have a disagreement at my office. I always express a unit of measurement in numerals. My staff say quality control advised them to spell out all numbers in text. What do you say?
Well, that sounds like a style guide issue,
Yes,
and
it's style
plain
guide.
language doesn't generally pronounce on those. I mean, personally, I think that people recognize the figures better. I mean, better and faster, but has that been tested with their core audience?
I am not sure, and they can always
Yeah.
reach out to you afterwards. But
Yeah,
I'm
so
Sure.
it's there are studies that have shown that, especially looking at screens, that it's easier to recognize and understand numerals, but a lot of agencies and style guides are still using the practice that if it's less than 10, spell it out, and if it's more than 10, include the numeral.
And if it's the beginning of a sentence,
Right, spell it out. But all we can really do is say be consistent. So whatever it is that your agency says to do, that's what you do.
although just letting you know, I have successfully changed style guides.
Yes.
We've been working on, yeah, I mean, you say we're going to follow AP style, except for we're definitely doing the Oxford comma, you know, the serial comma. You can do
Mhm.
that. I mean,
Mhm.
style guides work as long as they work, and then you have to revisit them because I remember when, I don't remember who it was, maybe it was AP, but oh, that was it, yeah. When I worked at another agency, they made email one word or database one word or something like really exciting like that, and GPO didn't. And we said, all right, we're not going to use GPO anymore. We're going to go over to AP style because we're writing about these topics and we have to have something that shows they've been considered. And it was a ridiculous amount of time, in my opinion, before GPO, you know, started even looking at that. And we were like, not going to use them if they're not using the words we need.
Great. Thank you so much, Katherine and Miriam. We are at time and a little past. Thank you everyone for
Oh gosh.
joining us today. We are collecting your questions as you put them in the chat. So if we miss any of them, we will pass them on to Katherine and Miriam to answer offline. And you can always email NOAA's contact, Karen Robin. Check out NOAA's Plain Writing Act on this link here. And Katherine will send me these slides and I will share them with everyone who attended. This was also recorded, so if you want to revisit it, you want to send it on to a colleague, the library will be posting this on our YouTube channel shortly after.
Fantastic. So much fun.
Okay,
Thank you.
So thank you everyone and be safe.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Miriam. Thank you, Katie.
Bye-bye.
Everyone have a really great day.